I think that you would be surprised if you found out what my most frequently asked question was from students both in person and online. Or maybe you wouldn't. I don't know. I was surprised. I'll be sharing that and this watercolor tutorial in just a moment. In order to paint our beautiful male Oriole, I need to mix kind of this golden color. I struggled a little bit, so you'll see I'm kind of going back and forth, and I'll be showing you a little bit of my process. So I have a little bit of lemon yellow with cadmium yellow, and I'm just kind of adding a little bit of this red tone. It's very similar to alizarin crimson. It's Deep Scarlet by Daniel Smith, and I'm just kind of testing it out to see how I want to mix this color. I struggled. Like I said, I went back and forth. I ended up with mostly lemon yellow and yellow ochre and just kind of mixing that golden tone. If I felt like it needed a little bit more warmth or a little bit more of a punch, I would add a little bit of the cadmium yellow, which is the color at the top. So at the top three yellows on my palette over here, not including the orange, I have cadmium yellow, lemon yellow hue, and then yellow ochre. And you'll see me kind of dipping back and forth throughout this tutorial to get kind of the shade that I want. And I'm just practicing right now on a scrap piece of paper to make sure the colors throughout the whole composition will blend together well. If you're new here, my name is Katrina, and I am passionate about teaching the fine arts and really professional level artistic techniques in a way that is easy to digest. But one of the things that I am asked all the time is for the illustrations that I use for my paintings. And people will ask if they can just have the illustration and then paint on it. And that goes against my teaching philosophy because honestly, I believe that one of the best ways that you can learn to paint and really to kind of level up that technique is to focus on the drawing. I highly recommend taking my 5-day flower drawing challenge. It's a free mini course. It has been a great resource to kind of boost you on your artistic journey. However, I also know that so much of art is therapy. So I've decided that a limited number of my illustrations that I share here on YouTube will be available for purchase. So starting today, this one will be the first one. I will be sharing this illustration with you. You can purchase it. It'll have a black and white version as well as a grayscale version so that it'll kind of it'll disappear when you're painting, which is more similar to what I do. The black and white version is a lot more like a coloring page. So that will be available online and you can purchase that and paint along with me if you would like, which would be super fun. Now, if you like this method of following a tutorial, please let me know down below. It's kind of one of those squeaky wheels, get the grease, right? So if you are interested in stuff more like this or you want to see something specific, leave that in the comment section so that I know. I can't read your mind. I can't even see your sweet face. And until then, let's get into the tutorial, shall we? To start off this tutorial, we're going to dip into the masking fluid. So I'm using a Winsor & Newton brand. There's nothing special about this. It just happens to be what I own. And I'm going to use a paintbrush to apply that to all the highlights and the natural white spots for this bird. So this bird has a lot of natural pattern on his wings. And so I'm kind of highlighting those areas, but also emphasizing areas on the feathers where I want to leave a highlight, where I don't want it to get too dark too quickly. And if you haven't used masking fluid before, or you haven't seen my video where I go through a couple different techniques and tricks, which I'll have linked down below, I like to dip my brush into a little bit of dish soap and then put the masking fluid on top of that, and that helps to protect my brush, and the masking fluid washes right off. And I discovered that after ruining several brushes. Now that I've kind of added the natural highlight, or the highlights that are very obvious, kind of the white spots, I'm going to go through and you'll see me doing kind of some quick flicks right there. And that is just to emphasize different textures or kind of the fluffier parts of the feathers. So there's going to be quite a few on the breast or just anywhere that it's nice and fluffy, and I want to highlight some texture there. These aren't areas I'm going to be leaving white later, but it is something that I don't want it to kind of lose the shape or the natural texture that it has. And so I'm applying a little bit of masking fluid so that as I'm painting, I can be a little bit more therapeutic, a little bit more lazy. I don't have to worry about, oh, I need to leave, some empty space for this texture. Now that we're going to start painting, before we start with anything else, I'm going to add a quick wash of just lemon yellow hue. This is pure lemon yellow hue and some water, and I'm applying that to kind of the body of the bird. And the reason that I did that is because it is a great way to get kind of a natural glow with whatever paint you add on top of it. And one thing that is going to be a theme throughout this painting is the beauty of using layers. So if you use layers to, several layers to create your paintings, so like a light wash really is kind of how I think of it. It's a great way to add a lot of depth and dimension with different textures through different kind of levels of value, which is just how light or dark something is. And so even with the head, even though the head is mostly black and it will be very dark, I'm starting off very light so that I have a little bit more control. This was a more therapeutic piece for me. It was in honor of my grandfather who passed away right before I painted this, right before I drew and painted it. He passed away earlier this summer, and he loved these birds and the glow that they had in the sun. And so I really wanted to make sure I capture that, but I also just wanted to relax, capture some of the texture that naturally happens when you are made of, if you have a feather coat, if you will. And so I'm kind of going in slowly. I want to be able to reserve those low lights for real shadows. Now I'm going in with our yellow mixture, and if you missed it at the front, it's kind of a mix of a lot of lemon yellow, a little bit of this cadmium yellow, and a lot of yellow ochre. Spoiler alert, I end up using quite a bit of yellow ochre, which is the third from the top of the screen right now, and that is going to be kind of the main color. But I brighten it and give it a little bit more personality with that lemon yellow, as well as that lemon yellow wash we added underneath will help to add a nice glow. That initial wash is also an awesome tool if you want to have some nice bright greenery. Having that lemon yellow base underneath will give it kind of that glow and make it look, it's like great if you're trying to do, something that is in the sunlight and show like what's brighter. That is a great trick. So I'm just kind of building up the body right now, and I'm setting aside a little bit of that yellow ochre, and you can see I'm tapping it now into the shadows, and I'm doing it on either end to kind of help round out the bird. Since the paint is wet, I can kind of just tap it. See how I'm just tap, 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 and it will help to kind of, the color will naturally blend a little bit. So I am pushing it around some, but I'm tapping so that it has a little bit more natural look. Rather than me kind of pushing. It tends to, if you're not careful, you can push some of the paint off accidentally. So sometimes just kind of tapping on damp paint will help it to blend more naturally. And I did add a little bit of, that is burnt sienna, and I'm adding that into the shadows, and you'll see I use that quite a bit. So I need that to be in shadow, so I'm adding that in here. Again, just kind of tap, tap, tap. Just kind of massaging everything around very lightly. I don't want to irritate the paper or pick up any paint that I've already laid down. I'm just slowly adding onto it. I really enjoyed this semi-wet on wet technique. I tend to be a wet on dry painter in general, but especially for my first pass or two, I do like to add in a little bit of that soft gradient. And so that is easiest to accomplish if you're working wet on wet. So wet paint on wet paper. So again, tapping a little bit of that shadow in there, just really highlighting some of these ruffles. I don't want them to get too dark yet, and that's why I'm going through these multiple passes. You can see I darkened the head a little bit again, and I'm continuing to work on different areas of the wings and just kind of building that up. I did decide to add a little bit of the yellow ochre in with the black just to warm it up a little bit more. Not necessary, but it is something that I like warmer blacks. I really like it, especially when I'm working with something that is living. I feel like it's a little bit more of a natural look, and it just fits with my style a little bit more. I tend to have kind of a warm color palette. So go with your preference. If you add a little bit in and you don't like it, feel free to drop it. It's just kind of a preference thing. And I'm just going to slowly start building up this color. It looks dark right now, but when it dries, you'll see that there was a lot of water in there and it still is pretty light. It's not too dark. I really wanted to be able to add some texture later on, which you will see after this dries. I'll be doing a couple of passes. Like I said, it's going to be a theme that you see throughout this painting. Now I'm adding another pass to the head of the bird, kind of his crown area, and I am just kind of adding some more color. You'll see that I had a lot of that yellow golden tone mixed in for his head, but I really ended up, my original plan was that I would continue to leave, like areas blank with each pass so that it would kind of reveal some of that yellow. But the more I painted and the more I was looking at my reference photo, the more I saw that that wasn't the direction that I wanted to go in. So that's one thing that's nice about having all these passes, is that you're able to kind of decide as you go, and change your plans. Where if I had gone in dark and heavy, it would be more difficult to pick up all that paint. Now, if you're working, you see that bald spot I have? If you find that you're picking up too much paint, the best thing that you can do, especially if you're working with a more granular color like this, is to let it go, let it dry, and just move away and work on something else. And you can see here, as I'm going to start building in the next layer, I am leaving some areas that lighter gray tone. And when the piece is complete, it will be much more visually interesting to have the varying shades of kind of that gray scale, rather than just having black and yellow and white. It will just have a lot more visual interest. I find that a lot of time beginning artists, especially as they're working on something, it's like, oh, that's black. Where look at all of the different tones of yellow that I have going on in the bird already. And there will be more as I continue to build and work on this. Why not put that same attention to detail in the black as well? Just because it's a darker color or a more intimidating color, or in our minds a more permanent color, doesn't mean that we can't take advantage of the variety of hues, or the variety of value and even of hues within it. Now, if you purchase the illustration that goes with basically the bird illustration, you don't necessarily have to do this. If you look at the reference image, it's not super accurate. However, I thought I would include it here and talk through my reasoning because I think it's beneficial. I am going over with basically a very, very watered down black wash. There's a little bit of kind of the yellow in there, but there's definitely some of that black just to kind of repeat the whole, keep the composition cohesive. I'm doing this to help knock the tail feathers back. And by that, I mean, I want them to be in the background. See how that is so warm and light? It really comes towards you because warm colors go towards the eye of the viewer, where cooler tones will kind of recede. And that's what I want to do. I want this bird to look like he is nestled within these roses. I don't want it to look like his tail is cut funny and there's a rose there. I really want it to look like he is within the roses. So adding a little bit of that shadow and just cooling and desaturating the tail a little bit. Desaturating as in, so a saturated color is going to be a brighter color and a desaturated color is going to be more dull and closer to like a grayscale. And doing that, it just automatically tucks it down. You can see how already he looks a little bit more kind of tucked into the background. I'm using this same wash on the beak, and I will also use it on the feet. Now, I don't want to draw a ton of attention to these elements. I have a lot of texture on kind of the chest and the wings of the bird, and so I just kind of want to tone down everything else, especially the feet. Have you ever noticed how weird bird feet are? I want them to be there because it's accurate, but I don't want to draw a lot of attention to it. So you'll see I put minimal detail here. I'm not going to be adding a bunch of other colors like I do throughout the bird. In a little bit you'll see, but I'm just kind of defining the space so it doesn't look funny and adding a shadow where there needs to be a shadow. I want it to look like it's supposed to, but without any detail. And that's just a way to kind of control the eye of the viewer, if you will. So direct them where you want it to be. I don't want it to be on the feet. I want the feet to be there so it doesn't look like a floating bird, but I want the emphasis to be where all the texture is. So on the chest, on the wings, on the head, where the eye is. That's going to be much more eye-catching. I do want to add a little bit of dimension though. So I am making, like the shadow underneath the beak. And you saw I added the shadow where the leg connected to the body. But in general, I want to keep that very light and very I don't know, without a ton of detail in there. Now I did notice that they needed a little bit more of a pop. As I kind of go back and forth, one thing that I do is I'll step away from my painting just so that I can see it more from a bird's eye view, no pun intended. And it helps me to kind of reassess. Sometimes you get too close. And I saw that there wasn't enough definition or modeling, which is just kind of the shaping of the bird here. And so I added a little bit more of that burnt sienna in there. I'm adding it a little bit in here just to kind of create more of a shadow. You'll see that I kind of underneath where the armpit, if you will, of the bird is, I added a little bit of the kind of alizarin crimson. It's deep scarlet, but alizarin crimson is very similar. I added a little bit of that to add kind of a warm glow, but that was kind of the only place that I added that. I'm now using a clean eraser to kind of remove the masking fluid. This is a super fun but also terrifying part, because then you notice how much you masked off, and sometimes you have to kind of feel around to find all of the areas that you put the masking fluid on, but I'll show you how I'm going to kind of soften those elements so that they're not kind of screaming in your face. I really just want to add a gentle wash. This is a very light wash. It's mostly pigment, it's mostly water and just a little bit of pigment. You see I have a very small detail brush, which I'll have linked down below. I'm using that with just a little bit of the dark paint, and I'm covering this so that they are highlights and they add a little bit of visual interest and texture, but they're not very loud. Same here on the wings. I want to kind of have that highlight and that definition, but it's just too loud when it's white. It kind of comes off the page, and you have to, when you're kind of working with a composition, choose which is the most important and allow that to be the stark white or the stark contrast or all of the texture. You kind of have to pick and choose. And so I'm slowly doing that. I'm picking and choosing. I'm defining some details a little bit more that might have gotten lost with the masking fluid, just because that's a little bit of kind of a clunkier technique. And just kind of defining that. Now I didn't catch when I filled in the eye, but it's very simple. I kind of had some masking fluid. I just fill it in completely with the black color or whatever color I'm using to fill in. And then I take a damp brush and I lightly pick up some at the very bottom, and that's how you get kind of that reflected view. And then for the golden part, I'm just adding a little bit of that golden accent as a slight wash, just again to kind of lighten everything so that it's not such a stark contrast. And then your bird is complete, sitting pretty with his misses. I hope that you enjoyed that tutorial. I did want to just say thank you for when you share, when you encourage me, and when you let me know that you're enjoying the videos. It means a lot to me. I love having you here. And until next time, happy painting.